All right. So you're minding your own business in life. You're just going along, maybe suffering a little bit, maybe suffering a lot. And then boom, you have an awakening, right? Big shift in identity. Although you don't tell yourself I had a shift in identity, you may not tell yourself anything like that at all. It just feels like something very, very fundamentally has changed in your experience of reality, your experience of self, your experience of life, your experience of the senses, your experience of thoughts, your experiences of consciousness. Something very fundamental has changed. And you find yourself saying paradoxical things like, everything has changed, and yet nothing has changed. You find that there's this paradox with the recognition that you didn't realize you could live this peacefully. You didn't realize you could actually live in flow like this. And at the same time, it's very obvious that it's always been this way, that you were actually adding something to the experience up here that was keeping things feeling somehow that there actually aren't. Like you were locking yourself into this mental prison in a way. And all of a sudden you just realize you don't have to do that anymore, or even that it was never happening. So of course it's very paradoxical. Now you may have been a spiritual practitioner. You may have had practices and done inquiry and been a Zen Buddhist and worked with Mu, or maybe you just meditated and didn't really expect anything like that to happen, but it suddenly did. And maybe you were just suffering so much that you came up with a question that was really important to you and really poignant about yourself or about life. And you asked the question with so much intention behind it to find an answer with so much heart behind it that the question actually went somewhere. It went to the right place, wherever that is, and it actually caused something to change, something to shift. And for some people, although it's rare, it does happen, you just have this random shift in identity and it comes out of nowhere, which can be very challenging. So it happens all these different ways. But what I really wanted to talk about in this video is that after that happens, that's when the rubber meets the road, when you talk about realization, awakening, enlightenment, and so forth. The real work comes after awakening. And right after awakening, it may feel like there's no work at all to do. And it may even feel like there's never going to be any work to do. Because you might tell yourself there's no one to do the work, or everything is just happening. It's also spontaneous. There is no suffering. There never has been suffering. And you also know that those truths are accurate in some sense. That's because you've woken up to, let's call it the absolute aspect. And in the absolute aspect, there is no suffering. It just doesn't exist. There's a profound truth to that, and you will live it for a while. And then you'll start to feel the power of conditioning. You'll start to feel the power of delusion that isn't gone. My Zen teacher used to say, when you have an awakening, your ego does not take that lying down. It might be very stunned for a while. It might be off in the corner, just sitting there with stars around its head, trying to figure out what happened and not really affecting you too much, but it will come back. And it will come back with fire. This happens, I think, to pretty much everyone. There was a time when I wondered if some people, it just didn't have that. But I think that it's not accurate. I think what it is some people don't talk about it. I know that's true. Some people just don't talk about that aspect of things, probably because they don't want to deter others from the spiritual process. Like, or it's hard to talk about. Like, how do you talk about this? It's so paradoxical and so forth. So what I finally have kind of come to the conclusion of is that there's no one out there who has this massive awakening, going 0 to 100 or something, 0 to 100%, and there's just no in between. There's no shadow work. There's no gritty, painful, confusing progression through a bunch of confusing places, through shame, through regret, through helplessness, and all of it. That just really happens, I think, to pretty much everyone. I think maybe for some it's worse than others, and some process it very differently. Some process it more publicly or vocally, and some just don't. But I think everyone has to go through that. And that's good, right? It's good that there's a way to get under the delusion. There's a way to really work through it all. And there's more than one way. But the big mistake you don't want to make is to just pretend it's not there. However that happens, it happens in all kinds of ways. It can happen because of a spiritual context that says, oh, there's no such thing as a shadow. There's no one that needs to do shadow work. This is all just happening. I'll get comments on this video, and I know who I'll get them from probably, that will say there's no shadow, no self, no nothing, no time, no one to do anything. It's all just happening. Right. Okay, that's fine. But it is conspicuously interesting that those comments come on videos where I talk about work. Right. And so that kind of approach is an error generally, right? That's using a spiritual paradigm that you constructed after maybe some true insight, as hopefully you had a true insight, an awakening at some point, but you have been bypassing somehow through life means, through various means, circumstances and so forth. You've somehow been able to sidestep that shadow work, but it'll catch up with you. It will. Sometimes it just happens because there's a lot of trauma. There's so much trauma that it takes a long time to work through it. Sometimes you're maybe just too busy. You stay very busy and you're not in a space where you can slow down and do a lot of shadow work. I mean, who knows? But we're all going to avoid it to some degree. That's just how it is. That is the shadow. If the shadow wouldn't be the shadow, if you could just shine a light in and see it all at once and that's it. So yeah, all of us are going to avoid it to various degrees. But I caution people not to be the one who avoids it massively. It's going to cause you unnecessary suffering and those around you. So just don't do that. But short of that, I wanted to kind of touch into what it is I think can smooth this process for anyone. What can avoid some unnecessarily painful, avoidant tendencies, painfully avoidant tendencies when it comes to doing shadow work and so forth. First of all, I think, what is it in the Eightfold Noble Path, right view is like number one. So this could be described as at least one aspect of right view, and that is the view that that when we wake up, when we have that shift, we have that initial awakening, there's a part of us that's like, oh, I feel so good finally. Finally, I feel good. And I know I've had the right to feel good this whole time. I know I didn't deserve that suffering. It was all conditioned. And it's true. Everything you believe about that is true. And so I don't want to continue to suffer. Of course you don't, right? So then when when this heavy material comes and it feels uncomfortable, we mistakenly think that because I'm encountering something uncomfortable, I'm making a mistake in regards to what I realized. Like it's almost like you try to take that realization and kind of like a whitewash the shadow stuff that's coming up. It doesn't work. And it can be confusing. It can really be confusing because you do know that there is no actual suffering. You do know that life can be lived in flow, right? But here's the deal. Here's what's changing here. Here's the key point I want to get to, and that is something about the will. What sticks around after awakening, let's say that makes this shadow work stuff so necessary and also challenging in various things, is the sense of the personal will, which can be it is very strong, but it's also more baked into who we think we are and how we act and so forth than we realize. You realize it going through shadow work, but that personal will that says exactly what I said before. It's like, I know that what I realized was true. I know that this awakeness is. I know that there is flow. I know that there is actually no suffering and no self even. You may even have that instinct, that clear realization. And so because of that, because of what I know, what we're saying without realizing it is we're saying, I shouldn't be feeling pain right now. I shouldn't feel something uncomfortable. I shouldn't feel resistance. I shouldn't feel shame, guilt, hatred, anger, on and on and on. Fear, right? And you're wrong. You're wrong. Because what's arising now is just what is. So you could say that first awakening is showing you what's what, as I kind of described in my book, right? It's showing you like, this is how it is. And then after that, when the other shoe drops, like I describe in the book, the next part is showing you, and here's really what's at the bottom of what caused the suffering before. And really what's at the bottom of it is the will, the personal will, which looks like reactivity first, resistance, and then it looks like something more just like misperception, right? The 10th fetter is ignorance. It's misperception and misinterpretation of what's actually occurring. This is when we get into subtle stuff like non-dual, when we get into subject-object construct and the sense of form, perception, all these, right? That's what you're actually confronting at that point. It's the will that is functioning in subtle ways, the subtle will. And that's much harder to see. The gross will is easier to see if you're willing to look at it and go, oh God, here's what I react to, and here's why I react, and here's what I think should be happening, and here's what's actually happening. And boy, there's such a divergence there. And wow, when I think what should be happening is real, and what I think what is happening, I can kind of overlook somehow. Boy, I suffer a lot. So that's the gross reactivity, the kind of desire and aversion, desire and ill will, pushing and pulling. That stuff's easier to see. But when you get beyond that, it can be hard to see the resistance patterns because they're so subtle. They get very subtle. But they are still based on will, in my experience. They're based on this, the misperception. Misperception. It always comes down to misperception. That's it. So that's what I wanted to really say here is that being willing to continue to confront and question your own views about everything, especially about anything that makes you suffer or makes anyone around you suffer, really questioning that is critical, and continuing to question it. Yeah. Now you'll get into places where there'll be just a totality of presence for periods of time or even ongoing in various ways, and yet there will be intermittent, some kind of contraction or some feeling of repression or something you're not fully seeing. Or maybe you get feedback from other people that you're not treating them well or something. It can be all kinds of things. There can be all kinds of keys, indicators or whatever, that something needs to be looked at. That's when even though you know and feel that there's peace here most or all the time, there's still something that I can look at. There's still something that's I'm not seeing clearly, right? That's when you use inquiry, and it's very helpful. What am I not seeing? What am I not wanting to admit? What am I not wanting to feel? What am I not wanting to see? These kinds of questions can be hugely helpful. Do it with somebody who will hold you accountable. Do it with somebody who will be honest with you. Do it with somebody who has experience with this kind of thing if you really want to accelerate the process. Yeah. Therapists can be good, but some therapists won't be able to get this deep with you. So somebody who's awake and who's done this work with people, somebody who's done a lot of deep shadow work, they're going to have good instincts with this stuff, and they can help you see it. You may not need that. You may be able to do it yourself, but you have to still be willing to inquire. You have to be willing to look at what it is that's holding you up, what it is that's not being seen, what it is that's not wanting to be seen, what am I not wanting to admit, what am I avoiding? Any of those questions, right? They can be really helpful. And the last thing I want to offer is always ask this question if you're feeling contracted, you're feeling out of sorts, anything, right? You're feeling some afflictive emotions, however that is for you. A really good question to get in the habit of asking is, am I adding resistance anywhere in this system, right? Now, you can ask it personally like that, or you can ask, is there resistance anywhere in my experience that I'm not noticing? Sometimes just asking the questions will calm things a little bit, because the ultimate answer is yes. In my opinion, if you're feeling contracted, if you're feeling any of this stuff I'm talking about, afflictive emotions, repression, if things feel kind of fundamentally uncomfortable, right? There's probably resistance somewhere. Yeah. And that resistance often will have a correlated belief. But I wanted to point those out separately: belief and resistance, or inquiry around what it is I want to avoid, what I don't want to see, all of that, which are kind of like essentially sort of beliefs. And then the resistance pattern, which is, you could almost say like, was it concrete? Or I don't know, I'll use the term concrete, but like has like maybe pebbles and little rocks in it. And then there's the sort of cement, right, that goes around it, that solidifies the whole thing. Those little rocks and stones maybe are the beliefs, and then the cement is kind of like the resistance, something like that. But resistance and belief start to really work in concert at those deeper levels, that when you're Well, they don't start to, they're already there, but you start to notice that they work in concert when you're working at those deeper levels of shadow and so forth. So let me know if that's helpful.